Before the myth existed, before stadiums filled up just to watch him jump, there was a moment when everything hung by a thread. A company in crisis, a player who didn't believe in them, and a mother who changed the rules without meaning to. In the early 80s, Nike wasn't the Greek goddess of sports we all know today. It was a brand many distrusted and that struggled to survive almost every day. They sold running shoes and little else. In the NBA, their name sounded as out of place as a bodybuilder in a ballet, and on the other side, a kid named Michael Jordan was just finishing his college years. He was good, yes, but not the phenomenon the world would later witness. A rookie with a shy smile, a confidence that bordered on arrogance, and a list of brands he wanted to represent in which Nike didn't even appear. Destiny didn't want them together, and yet someone looked at them and thought the opposite. A guy with a hunch saw something in that kid that others didn't. He said he would be able to see the future of basketball. No one knew it yet, but that impossible encounter was going to change not only the sports business, but the entire culture. Because there are decisions that seem small until you look back and understand that right there, exactly there, the world split in two.
Just last week in Queens, New York, more than 200 people lined up to pay $200 for a shoe most of them already owned. The Nike Air Jordan. The most successful basketball shoe in history turns 40 this year, and yet
by the mid-80s, pop culture was an explosion of color, rhythm, and consumption, and sports were no exception. Basketball courts were runways, players were stars, and brands, the new temples of style. Adidas ruled the streets. It was the brand of hip-hop, of the Bronx, of Run DMC, of the rappers who had turned 3 white stripes into a symbol of identity. Wearing Adidas was a cultural statement, not a sports one. If you didn't have Adidas, you weren't cool, period. In the other corner, Converse reigned on the courts. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Julius Erving, they all wore Chuck Taylors or Pro Leathers. Cameras focused on them, and fans didn't just imitate their moves, they imitated their shoes. Converse didn't need marketing, their product was the marketing. And in the middle of that board sat Nike, a company that, in basketball, was barely a footnote. Its identity was tied to runners, to athletic tracks, to the solitary technical sweat of just do it before the slogan even existed. It was a clean brand, too serious, almost collegiate. In the 80s, that didn't sell. For NBA players, Nike was boring. It had no history in basketball, no stars, no soul. The market was completely taken. People perceived Nike as a strange name to pronounce and believed their shoes were designed for running, not for flying. And yet that same emptiness was also their opportunity, because when everything is defined, all it takes is someone to break the rules. Nike needed a face, not just an athlete, but a symbol, someone who could make their products look like something more than rubber and fabric, but they still didn't know who. And in 1984, everything changed. To understand why Nike became a giant, we have to talk about a guy who had more faith than resources. Phil Knight, a college runner who in the mid-60s dreamed of breaking the monopoly of the German brands Adidas and Puma that dominated all athletic footwear on the planet. Phil was finishing his business master's degree at Stanford when, during a class, he heard a case about how Japanese cameras had dethroned the German ones. Nikon, Canon, they had all gone from being cheap imitations to world leaders. And that's when it clicked. If the Japanese could do it with cameras, why not with sneakers? His idea was simple, almost ridiculous: import athletic shoes from Japan to the United States. But there was a problem. Nobody knew him. He had no company, no contacts, not even a plan. He only had an intuition. For many it was madness, but in reality it was a decision that would define his entire life. With a bit of savings, he got on a plane to Japan. He walked through sporting goods stores, talked to salesmen, looked at catalogs, until he came across a brand that left him hypnotized: Onitsuka Tiger, a lightweight shoe with a more aggressive shape, unlike anything seen in the United States. Phil improvised. He introduced himself as an American businessman with a ready-to-go distributorship to bring Onitsuka to the North American market. It was a lie, but the hunch worked. The Japanese agreed. He returned home with a deal under his arm and without a real company to support it. That's how Blue Ribbon Sports was born in 1964, together with his former track coach, Bill Bowerman. The two of them put in $500. Their office was the trunk of Phil's car, and their first customers, college runners. They went from track to track, opening boxes and selling the shoes directly out of the trunk. But Bowerman wasn't just any guy, he was obsessed with detail. Every time he received a shipment from Onitsuka, he opened the boxes, cut the soles, weighed them, and thought about how to make them faster, more comfortable, more efficient. He changed materials, stitching, the entire design. He was a scientist of performance. That obsession led them to a breaking point. Bowerman no longer wanted to sell Japanese shoes, he wanted to create his own. In 1971, when their contract with Onitsuka ended, they decided to launch their own brand. They needed a name and a symbol. A design student charged them $35 for a logo in the shape of a wing, the swoosh. Phil wasn't convinced, but they used it anyway. That's how Nike was born, named after the Greek goddess of victory. For years, their business was modest but steady. They dominated running, and their identity was that of the solitary athlete who competes against the clock, not the rival. But success on the track didn't prepare them for the world that was coming. The world of pop culture, television, and sports stars turned into celebrities. Running could sell shoes to runners, but basketball could sell dreams to the entire planet. Before Air Jordans existed, sneakers were considered ugly. The history of athletic footwear begins in the 19th century when the idea of comfortable didn't exist yet. Shoes were stiff, with thick leather soles reinforced with nails or wood. Running in those was like trying to dance with bricks on your feet. The change came with the discovery of vulcanized rubber, an elastic and resistant mixture that allowed for softer, more flexible soles. For the first time, someone thought, what if we make shoes that don't hurt? That's how sand shoes were born, half canvas, half rubber. At first, they were used for walking on the beach, but over time they slipped into tennis clubs, becoming the most popular shoes for that sport. In English, they were later called sneakers, from sneak to move silently, because those rubber soles made no sound when walking. The first true sneakers were functional, but also boring and plain. But everything changed when an American company bet on a sport that was just beginning: basketball. The juiciest milestone arrived in 1908 when Marcus Mills Converse founded the Converse Rubber Shoe Company and began making shoes for basketball, a game that was becoming popular in schools and gyms. And in 1917, they launched the Non-Skid, the first shoe designed specifically for the sport. High top, rubber sole, reinforced toe, a revolution for its time. 5 years later, they signed an amateur player named Chuck Taylor, who not only wore the shoes but improved them. Suggestions, design, ergonomics. His contributions were so important that his signature ended up on the side patch. That's how the Chuck Taylor All-Star was born, the model that dominated the NBA for decades. For more than 40 years, every professional player wore Converse. There was no competition, it was the standard, the unwritten uniform of basketball. Meanwhile, in Germany, two brothers were founding a small factory in their mother's kitchen. One made the shoes, the other sold them. Their big break came in 1936 when they convinced Jesse Owens to wear their shoes at the Berlin Olympic Games. Owens won 4 gold medals and put the Dazzlers on the world map. But after the war, the brothers split and the business divided into two titans of the industry. Adolf created Adidas and Rudolph founded Puma, two names that for decades shaped the global competition in footwear. That's how the map of athletic footwear looked by the 70s and 80s. Converse ruling the courts, Adidas ruling the streets, and Puma ruling fashion, without knowing that someone else was stepping onto the court. Now we have to talk about Sonny Vaccaro, someone who wasn't a typical executive. He didn't dress like one, didn't talk like one, and above all, didn't think like one. His job was to discover talent for Nike in a field where the brand barely existed, basketball. And he did it with a mix of instinct, obsession, and a dangerously high amount of hunches. In 1984, while the big names of the draft were fighting for headlines, Sonny had a problem. Nike was on the verge of shutting down its basketball division. Sales were a disaster. They were literally bleeding. They also didn't have a decent budget, $250,000, a sum that was very poor if what they wanted was to succeed in the market. With that amount, they had to sign 3 players, 3 mid-level prospects who, in theory, were going to be the face of Nike in the sport. But Vaccaro knew this was a terrible idea. 3 mediocre players don't make history. They needed just one, someone who stood out and was a diamond in the rough, the cosmic idol. So while the other executives divided up names and strategies, Sonny watched tapes. He didn't sleep. He rewound college games over and over, looking for something others didn't see. Not just points or statistics, he was looking for presence, something that can't be measured but can be felt. One night, tired and frustrated, he ended up in a 7-Eleven. He asked the cashier, a basketball fan, what he thought about Michael Jordan. The guy said something that made him think if he hadn't made that shot that won them the championship, nobody would be talking about him. That sentence followed him all the way home. He rewatched the game between North Carolina and Georgetown, the college final that had crowned Jordan. But this time, he didn't look at the shot, he looked at what happened before. With 3 seconds left and the score tied, the play was designed for James Worthy, the star of the team. But the pass didn't go to him, it went to Jordan, and what grabbed Sonny wasn't the movement or the shot, it was his calm. That 18-year-old kid with the weight of a championship on his shoulders looked calm. No fear, no tension, no shaking. Sonny understood that this wasn't something you teach. You either have it or you don't. He rewound the tape one more time. He watched Jordan walk to the corner, receive the ball, and release the shot without hesitation. No heroics, no drama, just pure confidence. That's when he knew, this kid isn't a player, he's a brand waiting to be created. The next morning, he ran to the marketing office. He told them they had to stop splitting the money between three, that they had to bet everything on just one, on Michael Jordan. The others laughed in his face. Jordan was the third pick of the draft, expensive, unreachable, with a guaranteed contract lined up with Adidas or Converse, but Sonny insisted, "I don't want three mediocre players who will disappear in 2 years. I want the guy who's going to change history." In retrospect, it sounds obvious, but at that moment, Nike was a department in crisis, Jordan a rookie, and Sonny an employee with a hunch that was about to put the entire company in check. Breathed Adidas. To him, Nike was a brand with no history, no style, no street. In a world where image was everything, that was the equivalent of being a turd on a stick. His agent, David Folk, knew it. When Sonny Vaccaro called him to ask for a meeting, Folk was blunt: "Top players don't wear third-tier shoes." And he hung up. Meanwhile, the brand landscape was crystal clear. Adidas was Jordan's favorite, but it was in chaos. Since the death of its founder, Adi Dassler, the company had been left without leadership. Nobody knew who was making decisions, 4 executives, 4 different opinions, and an empire with an uncertain direction. Converse, for its part, was the summit of basketball. Magic, Bird, Julius Erving. But that was exactly the problem. Jordan was just the new kid who would have to compete with living legends. And Michael didn't want to be a shadow, he wanted to be seen, and he wanted his presence to be noticed. And on top of that, Phil Knight was tired of losing money in basketball. He had said that if they didn't close a big deal that year, he would shut down the entire department. Sonny knew it. He listened with frustration and anger. "You're throwing money at 3 mediocres, he told him to his face. "If you want results, give me more budget. Let's bet on someone big." Knight looked at him as if he were insane. But Sonny was gambling something bigger than a contract, his entire career. And then an idea hit him. He remembered something Howard White, the vice president of sports relations, had told him. In many African American families, the final decision is made by the mothers. That detail, almost casual, became the key to the plan. If Michael didn't want to listen, maybe someone else would. Sonny decided to go directly to the person who really called the shots, Dolores Jordan, Michael's mother. The move was suicidal. Nobody at Nike approved it. If it went wrong, he'd be fired. If it went right, it could be the beginning of something epic. So Sonny bought a ticket to North Carolina, got in the car, and drove to the Jordan family home. He went without an appointment, without authorization, without a safety net, only with the idea of securing the biggest deal of his life. The Jordan house in Wilmington, North Carolina had nothing corporate about it. There were no suits, no lights, no boardroom tables, just a mother who had already heard enough empty promises. When Sonny Vaccaro showed up and said he came from Nike, Dolores Jordan looked at him with distrust. She already knew who they were. She knew Michael didn't want anything to do with them. And the first thing she said was almost a goodbye. "We already know what we want, Adidas."
All through college, we wore Converse. And up to that point, my favorite shoe was an Adidas shoe, you know. And at the time that everybody was starting recruiting me about what shoes to wear, I was pro Adidas, you know, the whole time.
But Sonny didn't move. He calmly answered, saying, "I just need a few minutes. If I'm wrong, I'll leave and never bother you again." Dolores led him into the garden, not out of courtesy, but out of curiosity. There, in the middle of a conversation that seemed to be going nowhere, Sonny made a bet. He told her he could describe exactly how the meetings her son would have with Adidas and Converse would go. If he was wrong, there would be no meeting with Nike. If he was right, he only asked that Michael listen to them. Dolores accepted the challenge, and Sonny began to speak as if he had been in those rooms. At Converse, he said, "They'll all wear red ties for the Bulls. They'll say Michael has something special, but that he can't yet be on the level of Magic or Bird. If you ask them how they plan to differentiate him from them, they won't know what to answer." Then, without pausing, he moved on to Adidas. "They'll tell you they have the best shoes, the flashiest ones, the ones everyone wears. But if you ask who makes the decisions, each one will give you a different answer. Because since Adi Dassler died, the company has had no clear direction." Dolores listened without saying a single word until she asked him a direct question. "And you? What are you doing here?" Sonny looked her in the eyes. "Because I believe in your son, I believe he's different, and I believe you're the only person who knows it." That was the breaking point. For the first time, someone wasn't talking about Michael as a product or a contract. They were talking about his potential, about what he represented beyond the game. Dolores understood it, not because she blindly believed in Nike, but because she saw her own faith in her son reflected back at her. That night, Sonny returned to Oregon not knowing whether he had won or lost, but in that conversation, something had been planted that no company could buy: trust. And that trust became the key that opened the door to the biggest signing in history. While Dolores Jordan was thinking over the decision in North Carolina and Oregon, the Nike team was working against the clock. Sonny Vaccaro, Rob Strasser, and designer Peter Moore spent their days locked in between sketches, too much coffee, and arguments that seemed endless. They knew they had only one chance to impress the Jordans. If they failed, the basketball division would disappear. It was all or nothing. The first draft of the shoe was fine, nothing more, a mix of white and red with a clean design too similar to any other model of the time. Sonny looked at it and said what everyone was thinking. It's missing soul. Peter Moore explained that the NBA had strict rules. The shoes had to be at least 51% white. If they didn't comply, the player would receive a $5,000 fine per game. Everyone went silent until Rob Strasser, with a sly smile, threw out the idea that would change the aesthetics of sports forever. What if we make it even redder and we pay the fines? Sonny lifted his head. It was insane, but it sounded too good. Free publicity, controversy, rebellion, everything Nike wasn't and needed to become. That's how the first Air Jordan 1 was born, a shoe that challenged the league even before stepping on the court, a banned shoe, and with it, a completely new concept. It wasn't the player who had to adapt to the brand, it was the brand that had to represent the player. While Moore finished the design, Rob Strasser was thinking about the name. Air Jordan, he said almost jokingly. With the way he jumps, it looks like he's got air in his feet. Everyone loved it. It was simple, striking, unforgettable. But there was one small problem. David Falk, Michael's agent, had already said that name before. But in the chaos of the office, nobody cared. What mattered was that it worked, period. Within days, they had the prototype, the name, and the pitch. Nike was ready to receive the Jordans. All that was left was for Phil Knight, the CEO, to approve it. Phil arrived at the office on a Sunday. He pulled up in his purple Porsche, looked at Sonny, who hadn't slept in 2 days, and asked if he really planned to spend the entire division budget on a single player. Sonny didn't hesitate and said, yes, if we want to survive, we have to bet. Knight looked at him in silence. He remembered how he had started his own company selling shoes out of the trunk of his car. And finally, with a mix of skepticism and resignation, he said, all right, do it. Words that would carry enormous weight. On Monday, the Jordan family landed in Oregon. Michael didn't want to be there. He'd only agreed to the trip because his mother asked him to. When he walked into Nike's boardroom, his face said it all. Boredom, distance, that expression of, get me out of here. Dolores, on the other hand, observed everything carefully. The presentation began with Rob Strasser trying to break the ice, but the humor didn't work. The promotional video didn't work either. Michael barely looked at it. He clearly wasn't cooperating, making the atmosphere increasingly uncomfortable. And then Sonny Vaccaro realized that if he kept reading slides, they were done. He shut off the projector, took a breath, and spoke without notes, without marketing, without a filter. He told Michael to forget about the money, the contract, the shoe, that those things would come anyway. He spoke about his story, about when he was cut from the team in high school, about how he came back taller, stronger, more determined. He told him he was going to win titles, yes, but that the truly great thing wouldn't be what he did when he won, but how he would react when he lost. Because the world is going to lift you up, Michael, he said, but it's also going to destroy you. And when that happens, when they turn their backs on you, what you do in that moment will make you eternal. The room went silent. For the first time, Michael looked up because in that very moment, something struck him. Dolores noticed it, and although she didn't say it out loud, she knew that was the moment. That, behind all the speeches and lights, someone had understood her son. A few days later, the call came. Adidas had matched the offer. Sonny collapsed. All his effort, all his risk seemed pointless, but that wasn't the final word. Dolores requested a private meeting with Nike. She said they would accept the $250,000 if they added one condition: Michael would receive a share of the sales of every pair of Air Jordans. The Nike people went silent. That condition was complete madness. Brands paid fixed fees, players promoted the product, and that was it. Giving them a percentage was opening Pandora's box. If it worked, every athlete would start asking for the same thing. Phil Knight thought about it carefully because, after all, they had come too far with this deal. Finally, he said the words that would change history. If you're right about this, kid, it'll be worth every cent. Let's do it. That's how the clause that transformed sports into an industry was born. For the first time, a player didn't just put his name on a brand, he owned a part of its success. Dolores summed it up better than anyone. You eat, we eat, and with that sentence, a mother rewrote the rules of sports marketing, making sure that her son not only soared high, but got paid for every step he took in the air.
Interesting to see. All right, now, Michael, is this the shoe? Now, of course, we can't show what kind of shoe this is.
Yeah, that's okay. The color stands for.
But is this the shoe that the NBA wouldn't let you wear?
Yeah.
Now, why wouldn't they let you wear it? Just because it's ugly, I guess, for starters.
The contract was signed and the Air Jordan 1 hit the market on April 1st, 1985, and what came next was absolute madness. Nike had bet on selling $3 million in the first year, but the numbers skyrocketed to $126 million. It was a phenomenon no one could fully explain. It wasn't just a shoe, it was a symbol.
When Nike launched the Air Jordans back in 1985, they hoped to sell $3 million worth of product. Instead, they sold $126 million in 1 year.
But with success came something inevitable. Egos. Who had made all of this possible? Who was responsible for everything? The answer wouldn't be so simple. For Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, the answer was straightforward. The signing of Michael Jordan had many fathers, and like any success, everyone wants to be the one who fathered it, the only one. A polite way of saying that Sonny Vaccaro wasn't the hero he believed he was. In his words, Sonny helped, but he wasn't the MVP of that process. Hearing that, Sonny wasn't going to stay quiet. In later interviews, he responded without a filter. Phil Knight lies, Michael lies more than Phil, and George Raveling is crazy. The three of them need to destroy me so they can live happily. It was a war where each person told a different version, and the most incredible thing was that everyone seemed to have some part of the truth. Michael Jordan, for example, also downplayed Sonny. Years later, he said that George Raveling, his assistant on the Olympic team, was the one who really convinced him to listen to Nike. Jordan trusted him, and according to his version, Raveling told him, "Just listen to them, you've got nothing to lose." The rest was history, and if you ask Peter Moore, the designer of the Air Jordan, the truth is right in the middle. He summed it up without drama. Phil is partly right. Strasser was key to the deal, but Sonny was the one who first talked to Michael, the one who understood what he represented. Without him, Nike would never have even tried. They probably would have gone with Patrick Ewing. In summary, everyone was right, and at the same time, everyone lies a little to look good. Nike was built on gut feelings, not manuals, and gut feelings, when they work, always generate conflict. The contract with Jordan saved the company, created a line that today brings in billions, and turned a shoe into a religion, but it also left an open wound inside Nike. Was it a shared vision, or the ego of one guy willing to challenge everything? To this day, neither Knight nor Vaccaro acknowledge each other, and deep down, maybe they're both afraid of the same thing, that history remembers Nike not for its vision, but for a gamble that, purely on instinct, worked out way too well. The impact of the shoes was immediate. The Air Jordan 1 hit stores and sold out within weeks, a success that even the NBA couldn't stop due to the fine for not respecting dress code rules. On the contrary, it made them even more eye-catching for the public. "Banned by the NBA," said the ad. That phrase, which any other brand would have hidden, Nike turned into a legend.
On September 15th, Nike created a revolutionary new basketball shoe. On October 18th, the NBA threw them out of the game. Fortunately, the NBA can't stop you from wearing them.
Overnight, Michael Jordan went from a promising rookie to a cultural phenomenon. He wasn't just the most electrifying player in the league, he was a media figure, a role model, a style icon. Every jump he made seemed to defy physics, and every pair of Air Jordans was a passport to feel a little like him. Kids didn't just want to play like Jordan, they wanted to walk like Jordan, to be like him. The courts started filling up. The stadium sold out just to see him. Chicago, which had been a quiet market, became the center of the basketball world. And Nike, which had been on the brink of collapse, suddenly dominated the game. Everything turned 180 degrees. In less than a year, the Air Jordan was no longer just a shoe, it was a generational symbol. And the final numbers say it all. Just in 2023, Jordan brand generated $6.6 billion, around 13% of all Nike sales. With Michael taking 5% of those earnings, that's $330 million a year. 38 years later, the kid who didn't want to sign with Nike is still making more from a shoe than most active players earn in their entire careers. The 1984 signing wasn't just a successful contract, it was the birth of an era. The era in which the athlete stopped being just a face in an ad to become a living brand. Sometimes history doesn't change with a move on the court, but with a conversation and showing that you believe in someone. Nike was on the verge of disappearing from basketball, and Michael Jordan was just a rookie, but from that mix, something emerged that went beyond sports. The Air Jordan wasn't just a shoe, it was a statement that rebellion can also be stylish, that a player can be a brand, and that a gut feeling can be worth more than any strategy. But behind the millions, the campaigns, and the mythology, one question remains, one that even the protagonist couldn't answer. Who really won that bet? Nike, which became an empire, Michael, who became immortal, or Deloris, who changed the rules by listening to the offer? Perhaps the answer isn't in contracts or numbers or trophies. Perhaps it lies in that absurd calm before the shot when Jordan was just a kid, and someone finally saw him for what he really was, the future walking in silence. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. This was Hoop Secrets, and I'll see you next time.